My name is Megan Dion. I am the Public Art and Artist Program Specialist for the Nebraska Arts Council. And as my title describes, I manage a lot of public art projects, primarily the 1% for Art program, which is a state initiated program, state legislated program to be more specific. So I created a little slideshow presentation to share, taking some of the ideas that I have learned about public art and, sorry, I'm configuring my screen here a little bit, and how can I transform that so that it is relevant for you as creative districts, and how you might initiate public art projects and that sort of thing within your creative districts and across Nebraska. So really excited to be joining you here today and to sharing some of this with you. And of course, afterwards, there will be time for questions if Rachel allows it. And so with that, we'll get started. I'll try to describe pictures before I start talking about what the slide is about, so that you don't have to sit there and wonder what that picture is and who created it and all of that sort of good stuff. So this first picture here, and I hope you can all see the first image, intro to public art, and there's a bunch of people with bikes in front of a mural. And so I picked up this photo from the San Antonio. They have a creative district program also, and the King Williams district has murals all throughout the community, and they host different mural bike tours. So I thought that was a really fun, engaging way that creative districts can use the artwork in their communities to gather people. And that's a pretty good collection of people. So pretty exciting, good way to kick it off, I thought. So first, before we really dig in, I want to talk about some big ideas that you might start out with as you're starting to think about public art and what kind of steps that you'll be taking. These are high in the sky ideas to get started with that. So possibly you want an artwork to enliven the sense of community and creativity within your town square. Maybe you want to activate an engaging building, a boring alleyway, street corner, or park. Or maybe you want to create a gathering space or photo opportunity, or just a place where people will go and hang out and all of that fun activities. So, or perhaps you want to create a monument that honors something. And so if you want to do a monument to honor something, I would suggest thinking about creating something that remembers the generosity of your community, something that memorializes unity as a community towards a common goal, community strength and love and creativity. So it doesn't have to be a person or a group of people necessarily. It can be a little bit more broad. And we do this because we know that the community wants a place to gather, bond, and carry out public life, because individuals want to feel like they're a part of something, and because we know that when visitors come to visit our communities, they want to feel like they've discovered something unique and worthy of travel and worthy of sharing with other people. But we also know that conceptualizing unique and engaging art for your community isn't always easy. Community input about what public art might be beneficial helps make informed community improvements. And there are matters of equitable selection processes and best practices. And those equitable selection processes and best practices are primarily what I'll be focusing on in my presentation today. So just a quick note, I believe that as creative districts, you'll kind of be thinking a little bit about this idea of placemaking versus placekeeping, and both have their place in the realm of communities, and especially as creative communities. Of course, the idea of placemaking is different than placekeeping, where you're kind of thinking about either creating a new place or really thinking about who is currently in your community and creating something about the culture of the people that are currently there. So you'll kind of have to think about that, whether you want to create a new space and a new culture and bring in new people to your space, or if you want to really enliven and highlight what's already in your community. And that's something that you'll have to talk with your community as you move forward. So the selection process, which I mentioned before, I will talk about this really on a kind of a high level with 5 major steps. So to get started, again, I'll talk about the pictures first. So these are drain cover murals. And the whole idea of these is that you create really vibrant and fun art to help deter people from throwing trash in gutters that would then, of course, go into the drain. But they have taken off and they're popular. They show up in communities across the world. And it, it's just a really fun way to get started with public art, especially if you haven't had a lot of public art in your area already. So this first part of the process is where you have to determine your site, budget, stakeholders, and timeline. So when you're thinking about public art, pretty much the most important thing comes down to your budget, because the budget really has a key part in determining the scale of your work, and that helps you determine what location it should be placed, where it can have the best impact. So there are projects of all different sizes, and none of them are less important than the others or more important than others, and they can all be intimidating for different reasons. If your budget is smaller, you can always start with a smaller project, and it can be a really great way to get people excited in your community about seeing artwork around them and in their everyday lives, even on a small scale like these drain covers, or maybe doing like a sidewalk chalk festival, or painting benches, or some sort of competition like that. So there's a lot of ideas out there that are maybe more temporary, less permanent. And then on a larger scale, if you have a really large budget, of course, that's really exciting. And there are other challenges that come along with that as well. So then you have to start thinking about continued maintenance for larger projects, especially if they are more permanent. You need to think about things like footings, like what the sculpture will be placed on, or what the structure will be that is under or behind the artwork. And so all of those things really have to be planned in advance and have to be included in this budget. We do have some budget examples on our website, and I will share a resource for that at the end. So the core group of people, when we talk about stakeholders in these projects, there's really a very, very core group of people who usually get this first part of the process rolling. They have a high level of understanding of the project. They understand where the community is heading into the future, excuse me, and they oversee the project as it moves forward. So sometimes that core group includes people like project managers, so probably all of you who are on this call today. Sometimes it includes architects or engineers, but it usually is that high level that really talks and solidifies the budget and the site where the artwork will go. And talking briefly about timelines, most projects I work on through the 1% for Art program through the state take about 2 years from start to finish. Those tend to be a little bit larger projects, and that can always change, especially if you're doing more temporary projects or pop-up events and that sort of thing. You know, that might be really a lot different. But for me, I always like to create a timeline in advance that talks about, it goes over things like setting aside time to talk with the community about expectations and duties, and it talks about what the artwork goals are. So we have to talk about all of these things so we can create the RFQ. Then there's a 2-month period where the RFQ is open so that you can accept submissions from artists. Then there's a small amount of time where the committee gets together and selects finalists from that pool of submissions. And then there's a presentation element in that timeline. Never forget the part where you have to create the contract. That's a really important part, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And then there's the period of time to create the artwork and install the artwork. So those are all elements that you'll want to be sure to include in your timeline. The next stage is, well, let me talk about the artwork first. So this is a project. It might not even look to you like a public art project. It is a little bit different. This is an artist named Candy Chang, and she does these really interactive public art projects. And this started on a grassroots level, but it's to the point now where she has these as these stickers as templates, and you can print off the stickers at like Kinko's or something in your community. And if you have like an empty storefront, the idea is that you put the stickers on empty storefronts, on you see all of these examples here on the left of boarded up areas or places with chain linked fence, and people can write on the stickers what they wish that space was. And so I have a few different pictures here, of course, where they've been installed, what the stickers look like, and then what some people have written. So some people write really silly things like, they wish this was Brad Pitt's house. Or, and then there's some things that are a little bit more realistic or practical, or something that is actually useful and could help a city planner understand what that space might be effective as in the future. So I added the link here in case anyone was really interested in this and wanted to take a look at maybe adding this to a storefront in a community near you. So there's that. I love this project. This artist does great work. So back to the issue at hand. The second part of the selection process is to have a discussion about what you envision. So you need to think about purpose first. So what is the purpose of the artwork in your community? What artwork goals do you have as a community? And then you'll kind of start to wrap your mind around your size, your materials, but really it comes back to those goals. So after sharing the information that that core group has come up with about the scale and the site, this is where you should plan to discuss and hear what people hope the artwork will portray and how the community hopes to use that space in the artwork site. This helps once you get this information and really are able to package it up into a concise couple paragraphs, that helps the potential artists who want to submit ideas for your call for art. It helps them harness those ideas to manifest them through their artwork. So to have a really good understanding, just understanding of what goals, artwork goals you have, it helps the artist be able to meet those goals more fully. And I'll also say here that some communities have decided that instead of going really big and permanent right off the bat, it might help to host temporary public art projects or events or online surveys to help understand what that purpose might be for a more permanent artwork. So kind of taking this Candy Chang public art where it's super easy. All you have to do is go print off these stickers and, you know, say this is Candy Chang's project, but let's hear from you what you would like to see this become. But then take that idea and put it into the public art realm. So you might even want to have the selected artist do some of that work on your behalf for the community. Dave Lowenstein, who is a muralist from Lawrence, has done a similar process to this in many towns to create meaningful murals for communities, very site-specific and relevant pieces that speak to the community and really have a special hold for that place. And if you want to explore an array of really creative ideas, I always say, I'm not the artist. The artist, you know, comes up with the ideas because I am not the artist. I would suggest being not as specific about something like, we want a figural sculpture or we want a welcome mural, and maybe like pick the site and describe what your artwork goals are, and then leave it a little bit more open-ended so that the artist can really dig into learning about the community and what will serve them the best. So I think this is a really important part of the process, is to understand what the community wants to see in their public art. So the next stage here is to create an RFQ, which is otherwise known as a request for qualifications. And in the most basic term, you could call it a call for artwork. With all of the specifications that we have talked about to this point. So your budget, your site details, your timeline, your artwork goals, and then take all of those elements and put them into a document. And this, what I have here on the screen is 4 pages of an RFQ that I created for a project at UNK. So you'll see on the first page, I have a cover page that has basic details like the submission deadline and the total budget and who has the call, who's hosting the call, where would the artwork be. The second page includes a description of the artwork desired. That is where you talk about what the community wants, how the space will be used, and there's a page that talks about the history of the university or of the town, or what the community, who makes up the community. And then of course, I always include submission instructions, criteria, what are you looking for, what will you be basing your selection on, your timeline, of course, budget details, and who is eligible, and all of those sorts of details. So you'll also see here I have some renderings of the site. They aren't actual pictures because the site wasn't completed yet. So there are a couple different ways that you can include pictures to help the artist visualize what the space will be like. So you can do that with actual pictures or with renderings of people using the space in your community. Maybe even if it isn't that space, but so they understand that there are people who are really active in that space. Just so the artists understand visually and can visualize what they might create. All right, moving on. Let's see, so I'll start by describing these pictures. This is an art project by Hank Willis Thomas, and it was done in 2015. So his concept was he wanted it to be interactive, and it was interactive on 2 levels. So he started by creating these booths, which you'll see on the right, this truth booth, which is in Ireland. And people would go in through this little door here, and they'd sit down and they'd write on a little piece of paper what their truth is. So they got a prompt, the truth is, and then people would have to write what the truth was. And people would, of course, do fun things or really deep things, or things that no one else has they've never told anyone before. And then he would take those little pieces of truth and create these signs that he would put throughout the community, in the community where he had that truth booth. So you could walk through the streets and interact with people without physically having to say anything to anyone. And I thought that was a really beautiful way to encourage interaction and feeling like you're connected with others. So the part of this process is to select finalists, pay finalists, and for them to create a site-specific proposal and then present it to you. So I will just say this is the method that we use for the 1% for Art program, and it is most typically used for public art projects. It is the standard, the best practice standard for public art projects. With that said, there are also other methods of public art projects that you can use, and again, that it all kind of can be more like confetti in the air whenever you start doing temporary art projects or things that are a little bit more nebulous or small. That can really become a little bit more nebulous. But I want to talk about this process because this you can use for almost anything public art related. We do this sort of process so that when there are 100 applications, not all 100 of those applicants have to go through many hours to create a site-specific proposal for every single project they're applying for. That's just non-realistic. That would be a lot of time. So what this means is that when they're submitting their work to your project, it's usually their past work that they've done. That might be relevant to the work that you're trying to do. So they're not going to be submitting work for your project. They'll be doing, like Hank Willis Thomas might submit these pictures as a past project, even though he's not going to do that at your community. And then you'll look through all of those applications, and there will be elements in there about your community or how it might relate to yours. You'll pick 3 finalists and then pay them to create a proposal, which is super specific to your site. It goes really in depth into their budget, how they'll interact with their community. They'll provide renderings and photos and a whole concept statement. It's a really fun process. That's my favorite part. I love seeing the proposals that come in from the artist. But then you get to pay those finalists, and that's definitely helpful when artists are trying to figure out what projects they want to participate in. And with that said, some smaller projects, let's say like the drain covers that you might want to do for your community, that might be better suited to just ask for a proposal right off the bat. And that's because you know, that might help the artists who are trying to break in to a public art realm where they might not have a ton of past examples of previous artwork, and it would be really helpful for them if they could just present to you an example of what they would like to create in your community. And so that's a really great way to help emerging artists and help them get in the door a little bit faster. So the last part of this selection process is you'll have to select your finalist after the presentations and proposals all come through. And then you'll decide on which proposal is most appropriate. Start on the contract. Usually we like it if the artist can begin work after the contract has been completed. That just helps ensure everything is on the up and up and that they haven't started a project without being confirmed that that's going to happen. And the reason that we do contracts or agreements is so that you can be clear and communicate all of the expectations about the project and who is responsible for what. And I will just say that especially for like a first time project, talking with a lawyer can help a lot so that you're sure that you include all of those really important elements. One really important element to include, probably for you as creative districts, as there are different partners, is who will be issuing the contractual payments. For our 1% projects, usually we break out the payments in four separate payments. So at each step of the artwork creation, they get a payment, and they have to send in an invoice, and you get to see the progress along the way. So you're not just paying for the whole sculpture or mural all at once. It's kind of broken up along the way. And then one last thing on this, as far as responsibilities, very specifically, you'll want to lay out who is responsible for, if it's a sculpture, who's responsible for the footings of that sculpture. Is someone in particular responsible for the light and the engineering schematics if it is a larger scale project? Do you need a lift or scaffolding to complete the mural, and who is responsible for that? So there are those really specific things. And again, that's in the budget, which I have a link for at the end. And the very last thing on a contract is be sure to mention the Visual Arts Rights Act, VERA rights. And I mean that you'll want to look into that and predetermine who has the rights. The artist should always have the rights to their artwork, but be able to use the photos for your marketing purposes and that sort of thing. So just look into VERA rights, look into what happens if the artwork needs conservation, and what happens after a temporary installation is over. Who is responsible for moving the sculpture, storing the sculpture, or painting over a mural, and that sort of thing. You know, again, this contract is really about communicating all important responsibilities and expectations from the very, very beginning to after the sculpture or mural or artwork in general is ready to have its life lived and be put to rest. So contracts are fun, a little scary, but always good to have. And then I do have a bonus round. What happens after your artwork is installed? And for this imagery, I have this horse sculpture. It is a bronze sculpture and it is being conserved. So you might think that once you have an artwork up, it just gets to live there and be pretty and you can say, toodaloo, see you later. But that's not always the case. And especially some artwork does need more conservation than others, but even things like bronze, which you would maybe expect has like an unlimited shelf life, still needs to be conserved. The Association for Public Art is a group out of Philadelphia who has a really spectacular public art collection, specifically with stone and bronze sculptures. And they've contracted Tati Art Conservation, and they come every year to inspect all of the artwork, to do ongoing maintenance. They take apart the sculptures and they put new finishes on. So it's a really fascinating process, but it is something to think about. So that goes along with my last bonus round part of the process here. What happens after the installation? If you intend for your public art to be there for a while, try to set aside some money for regular maintenance. Most art, especially outside, requires some attention. Make a concerted effort to regularly check on your artwork, get good photographs, be sure to publicize them. You have the artwork, you have the information about the artwork, and that's something to be proud of. And that was the reason why you put the artwork there in the first place, was you're proud of that moment. If you would like, unveilings are always a really fun event and something that you can add to the experience of your artwork. If you want to include or continue your public art endeavors, you might consider coming up with some guidelines for your creative district public art program. This Association for Public Art started as a community public art association. The Fairmount Public Art Association in Philadelphia, and they grew into this whole citywide program, and they have a huge collection, like I mentioned. Definitely something if you're interested to look into it a little bit more. And then the last thing here is perhaps you start an inventory of your public art, and can the inventory be online? So these last slides I'll go through a little bit quickly, or more quickly. And but I do want to touch on these a little bit. These are different types of public art, and some of these I don't get to work on very often in 1%. So the ones on the right side, the less typical, more flexibility, aren't really projects that I get to work on, but I'm really excited for the potential of creative districts possibly being able to work on these. And I can't wait to hear if you do. So please share if you do get to work on those, if you want help thinking about them anymore. So on the left here, we have more typical, less flexibility. So we've talked a little bit about monuments. There's building enhancements, sculptures and objects, or site enhancements. And those are probably more permanent sorts of artwork, and probably a little bit larger. The less typical, more flexibility are interactive public artwork, technological, temporary, land art. And so all of these are a little bit more nebulous, really impactful though. So definitely don't discount them if that comes up. So here's just a few images that I wanted to talk about. For monument, when most people think of monuments, bronze figural statues often come to mind first. Some people might think of the Vietnam Memorial by Maya Lin. And there's been a lot of recent research recently from the Monuments Lab and the Mellon Foundation. In the last slide, I talked about monuments as a permanent sculpture. And this particular monument, Fountain for Survivors by Pamela Council, was a temporary monument. And if you can believe it, this is made with acrylic fingernails, that whole sculpture. So really fascinating, but it was a temporary sculpture, and there's a fountain in it and everything. So interestingly, and this is if you want to have some sort of a monument, some of the research out of monuments labs talks about permanence of monuments and how perhaps it would be better if some monuments were not thought of as so permanent, that what we lift up as a community might not be the same 100 years from now. That viewpoint allows more flexibility in the concepts behind monuments. So there is the possibility that monuments can be temporary, or at least more temporary than normal. And that also gives a little bit more flexibility to the types of materials you create them with. So maybe you can use acrylic fingernails instead of bronze, and have a little bit more fun with that. The next one I want to talk about is a building enhancement. So typically the most usual building enhancement you'll see is a mural. Those are definitely the most common. And I will say that one of my most favorite mural programs is the Philly Mural Arts program out of Philadelphia. And I definitely encourage you to take a look at that if you haven't already. But this particular project is so fun. I just think this is brilliant. What you see on the building itself is not a building, it's actually on the ground. And so people can come up to the sculpture that's on the ground, horizontal, and create these little scenarios and pretend like they're doing things. But what's up against the building is a mirror, so that whenever you're on the ground doing these different scenarios, you can see on the mirror what that would look like if that were the facade. So I know it's not technically a building enhancement, because it just looks like it is one, but it's super fun and playful and creative, and I just wanted to share that with you. Talking about object and sculpture, this is a sculpture in San Antonio, and I wanted to share this one because it involved the community a lot. So the artist Margarita Cabrera created this, and she was the whole impetus behind it. But all of the little things hanging from the sculpture that you see, they are ceramic, and there are 400 of them, and the community helped make all of them. And what they are is they are serving as memories of ranching throughout Texas. So it's a really beautiful story. It's called The Tree of Life, and it's along a bike trail, and it's, I mean, it's just a huge success. I think it turned out to be a huge community project, and they're all still loving it there. I will also say though that there is the possibility of having something more temporary with objects and sculptures by having rotating pieces unknown from artists. And Franconia Sculpture Garden is one example of that, where they have exhibitions with sculptures, but they're all outside, and it is a longer term loan, but it's a great way to get sculptures coming through without having to have that huge upfront cost of a sculpture. Another example is the Sioux Falls artwork, totally different example, but these are also options that you can think about, is having your sculptures on them. A site enhancement. These, you know, I talked about land art previously, just briefly. Site enhancements, I think, are the more permanent version of land art. It takes a park-like setting and transforms it into an elevated or interesting place for people to gather. And they can be places that encourage play or learning or curiosity. And here are just a few examples of really fun and intriguing ways that people have done that successfully. So we'll just keep moving. Here's another site enhancement. This is a mural on a basketball court. And I mean, it's just a really fun way to get people to interact with public art. Totally different, just very different way to do that. So now we're going into the more less typical and more flexible types of public art. And so again, if you do any of these in your community, please let me know. I'm super curious. So these temporary public art projects tend to have higher, like really high energy. They might not last as long. They don't have as much of a tangible longevity, but they live on in people's memories quite strongly. And so it's a great way to just get people out and interacting with you as a creative district, and to hear what their ideas are, and to get excitement generating about public art in their environment. So just a little bit about these images. The one on the left is the Headlight Theater in Sioux Falls, and that is a grassroots dance collective. And they host a secret location where then everybody is invited to come with their headlights on a parking lot or in a park, and then the dance collective dances in the headlights. So it's a really high excitement kind of thing. And one other really great thing about temporary public artwork is it can include a lot of different art forms. So you can think dance, music, culinary, you know, the sky is really the limit. You can do a lot of different things. And then on the right, you'll see The Gate, which is a super famous artwork by John Christo and oh gosh, I just messed that up. John Claude and Christo. Sorry, I know Suzanne is there like, whoa, Megan. So anyway, that aside, the Gate is a really fantastic piece, and they did so many wonderful collaborations when they were creating these works, and they're fabric. And so they were not permanent. They would drape fabric over entire buildings and create these places where people could walk through and interact with the artwork. And so again, it's something that you interact with in that moment and you remember for the rest of your life. So it's really impactful. Just one more example, a little bit closer to home. this is in Kansas City. So this was a city arts-wide festival, public art festival, where they had 40 public art installations by international, national, and local artists. It was 9 weeks long, and I mean, it just sounds fantastic, but they had really excellent artists, and they also had music and dance and food and like pop culture musicians too, like for headliner concerts. So it was a very big arts festival, but people are still talking about it. It gained national recognition. And there's always the means to do this on a smaller scale. You don't have to have 40 installations, but using the spaces that you already have in your community, I think is what made this so successful. Because what the goal was to bring the different parts of the community together that might not have talked as much before, but putting the art in all of these different communities and trying to get conversations started between different opposing communities or communities that just didn't talk very often. So that was a really beautifully done temporary public art project. So technological art, this is another thing, it changes so quickly, always changing. It's very exciting, and I mean, the sky is the limit. So over here we have the Crown Fountain that was installed in 2004 in Chicago at the Chicago Public Art Park, where you could also see the bean if you're familiar with that one. It's great. They have these huge towers that are LED screens, and they took hundreds and hundreds of videos of people that they could put on the screens, just different people, and it rotated, and people used it as a splash pad. It was, to me, a huge success. I don't know if this is going to work, and I'm almost afraid to hit play, but it's an AR piece of the Liberty Bell. I'll try it. I apologize if it goes wonky, but we're almost done anyway. So this is an AR piece Nancy Cahill created. And so when you hold it up anywhere in the city, you can see the Liberty Bell swinging in the space. So it's a really interesting way to think about public art, and it's totally ephemeral and not realistic at all, but it's really fascinating. So there's a whole nother different subset of public art for you. And then I talked briefly about land art. This is probably the other side of that site enhancement I was talking about before. So land art started in the 70s about, and it's a little bit more temporary by nature. And it usually gets worn down by the environment or is allowed to get changed by the environment. So it is, you know, a more temporary. And oftentimes it does take on more complex issues than the site enhancement sorts of projects do. So I wanted to shout out to this project. It's a project that was started in 2021 to 2022 called Untitled Land. And it was an outdoor work by Nicholas Gallinen in conjunction with many community partners. So they really partnered with a lot of people, including the Catawba Cultural Center. Over the year, this exposed form of the Andrew Jackson Monument at Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C., which is very problematic to this community of the Catawba Nation. They dug this form out, they planted it with this corn that they're trying to regrow the corn store, the seed, and it's really important to their nation and their community. So they grew that corn and reclaimed that space. And then they had a community event at the end where they all ate this soup together, and they braided and dried the remains of the corn. So it's a very beautiful project, but definitely based in land art. So I wanted to end here with these different types of public art and say there's so many different options. I tried to pick some really unique ones that you might have not heard of or thought about before. So just not saying that you have to do any of those, but saying that you can do anything. And there's a lot to be excited about when it comes to public art and all of the things that you can do with it. Just a brief cautionary tale. I don't know how many of you watch Parks and Rec or have watched Parks and Rec, but this was a really funny element of this show, where they have all of these murals that are a part of their town hall, and they're so problematic. They're so bad. And so I just, when you're talking about meaning and what goes into your public art and who's a part of the decisions, really keeping everyone involved will help make sure that those issues kind of get discovered early on and help you move forward, and just keeping those discussions open. And then here on the right here, just a sculpture, this is why we do a process, is so that we can try to get past some of the quirks of sculpting and of art making, and make sure that the artwork that gets placed is something that we really feel proud of into the future and forever ever, if it is meant to be that way. So as you're going through, be sure that you're checking in with the artist, and be sure that when you're making these selections, you feel really confident about the artist that you're selecting and their ability to portray in your artwork what you want to have portrayed. So I've kept promising some resources at the end, and here they are. So if you look at this first resource, that's the Arts Council page for creative districts, and that is where you can find this sample planning budget for public art. If you have any trouble finding it, you can reach out to me. I'd be happy to help share that with you. It's in one of the little drop-down menus. So there's that. I also would like to recommend the Springboard for the Arts Toolkits for Change. It helps you walk through working with artists as a community, and helps artists walk through public art working with communities. So there's 2 different ones, and they approach it from all different angles, and I think it's a great resource. I mentioned talking with lawyers about your contracts, and I believe that Amplify Art still has their volunteer lawyers for arts. It might be a good resource for you if you don't have a lawyer handy, or they might be able to give you another resource for that. And then lastly, when you're talking about how to pay artists, I think Wage is a really good resource for figuring out contracts and how to appropriately pay artists for their work. And so I would suggest giving that a look. And there's a ton of more resources out there, and I'd be happy to be one of them for you also. So if there's anything that comes up, just feel free to reach out and hit me up. So that is what I have for you today.